Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching or listening to this. Welcome to another episode of the Draft Crush. My name is Edgar Salmingo Jr., joined always by the incomparable Ricky Rains. Ricky, how are you?
Incomparable, maybe exhausted is a better verb right now for today. Um, I'm good, man. I'm great. Edgar, I was sitting here and I was listening to that intro song, and one of the things that I hate when we take these breaks in between episodes is that I don't get to listen to that song as much and watch that video. So I might just end up throwing that on like a playlist during the week because that's my jam right there. How are
There
you,
you
dude?
go. I'm good. How could get another day to talk about the draft? So we've
Yeah.
got 14 days until the magical day, but uh, we've got for me, I think we have a legend in the building today. We are very honored, very blessed, very lucky to have the wise, the amazing, also incomparable, maybe not as exhausted as you, Ricky, but just does incredible work in the space. We're happy to bring on Mr. Matt Waldman. Matt, how are you?
I'm done after listening to that intro and seeing the intro. I don't need to do any other show anymore. I mean, that was the funkiest thing I have seen on a football podcast. It
Right.
was I loved it. I absolutely loved that. And no, I mean, it's a pleasure to join you guys. I had so much fun chopping it up with Ricky last year,
Yeah.
that I've been looking forward to this. And I've been looking forward to talking about how this draft may be for the Panthers, from a Carolina tilt. So, I live in Georgia, and I'm not an Atlanta Falcons fan, but I see a lot of NFC South football, around
Mm,
here, and so it's fun to keep up with that division.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Matt, can I ask you your opinion then? Because what did you think of Xavier Leggett and Jatavian Sanders' rookie seasons? We didn't get much of a look at Jonathan Brooks, but those were the two big splashes last year in the draft for Carolina. What did you make of what we saw from them?
Well, I mean, I think that Leggett gave you moments where you felt like, okay, he can win some targets for you on the outside. He can give you a little, I felt like that Carolina used him well for what he is. So I thought he was a good prospect. He would have been one of the better prospects in this class. But compared to what everybody else was, who else was in the class in 2024, I would say, he was kind of more in the bottom end of my top 12 to top 15, which was just a historic class.
Right.
But I thought Carolina used him well for what he is. And I think that there's something to build on. Sanders had moments where I really was, where I thought he showed up and showed pretty well. I mean, there were moments in that Kansas City game. I think that was the one where he got hurt, right? And
Yep.
but like there were moments in that game that stood out to me. And I think that there were moments, in other games that I saw where I felt like, okay, this is something to build on. Neither of those guys I looked at and said, oh, there's trouble here. What I saw more than anything was these are guys who are acclimating, at a reasonable pace, maybe not out gaining expectations, but
Sure.
you feel like they can be a part of your core.
And so with Xavier, right? This was the interesting thing for me, Matt, is that I didn't have an issue with his catch ability, with his catch technique coming into the draft. I thought that those were actually two of his stronger points. I thought that he had really strong hands. He did a really good job high pointing the ball. Um, and he had the drops last year as a rookie. Do you see that almost more as like you were just talking about the acclimation to the position to the NFL and more of a mental hangup than it was anything physical?
It's absolutely a bandwidth issue, if you ask me. What happens is, I mean, I like to explain it this way. All right, so say you've had a fair amount of training in some sort of skill, and you go to school for it. You've been working on it since in high school. You had just a passion for it, and you went from like junior high to high school to college, and you've been working on these things, and certain things you are known for already, like among your peers, and then even your teachers are like, you're really good at skill A, but you've got to work on skills C and D and G and H, So then you get to a job, and it's a more demanding job, and it's a full-time gig, and it's with a high profile organization, and you are starting kind of, in a role that you've trained for, but there's a lot more responsibilities involved in that. You've never dealt with a lot of the outside stuff. Now you're paying bills on top of that, and you're out of your parents' house, out of the dorm room, and you've got a mortgage payment or a car payment or both, or whatever's going on, and you're still figuring out how to budget. You got people maybe in your family who are trying to hit you up for a little bit of money. They've helped you put you through school, and whatever it is. And you think about with football players, all the bandwidth of an enhanced playbook that's just like a lot thicker. The opposing defense is a lot savvier at disguising things that you've already seen before, but they react so much faster, and they're much trickier at trying to hide things. And then on top of it, you have to read the defense at the same level that the quarterback is, and they usually have a year or two on you, or if not 8 to 10 years on you. Like if you were a Green Bay Packers receiver with Aaron Rodgers, for instance, so you can look good in camp when you're winning one-on-ones, or you've got two-way goes in the middle of the field, and they're and you're facing safeties. But then, like late in preseason, when now we're like practicing the things that you're going to see on the field, which is like, oh, did you see that disguise cover 3 with the safety with the robber, or did you not see that, the second you took your first step against press coverage with the defender who's playing right to you and jams you. Right. And now you didn't see it, and the quarterback's going to it all the way. And now the ball's like suddenly like right in your face, and you're late to put your hands up. And you're like, I haven't been late to put my hands up since like 9th grade, but now I'm doing it all the time,
Right.
And that's what happens is the bandwidth of everything else happens. And as you're trying to catch up to that, you start making stupid mistakes on things you've never screwed up on before. And that's why some guys go into a hole, because their confidence is their confidence is rocked, because no one's telling them, they say it to them in a way that sometimes people say it's like, it's going to be a whole lot different in the NFL. It's going to be harder. You don't know what that means. Or if they say to you, you're going to be making mistakes that you've never thought you've made before, part of you is going to go, no, that's not true. I'm good. Like I'm going to show them. And then suddenly it starts happening, and you're worried about, I'm not going to be able to stay on the field. And if I don't stay on the field, the media's going to say I'm a failure. And then I'm going to have to read about it. My family's going to ask me about it. The TV people are going to be talking about it. And I still don't even know the playbook fully yet, but I'm trying to fake it until I make it, And it's like that whole thing is going on with these players. It's a lot. And we saw what happened with Bryce Young 2 years ago, and then what happened this year. And when he got a chance to sit, suddenly you're looking at him, and now everyone's like, oh, wait a minute. You mean CJ Stroud was the best quarterback in this class? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe it was Bryce Young. Maybe he was one of the. Maybe he's earning the billing that he got. On draft day. So,
that's right. I love it. Look at that, man. You probably just riled up the entire fan base right there. Maybe it's not CJ Stroud. That's exactly what everyone wants to say, man. So that's a great little segue. Shout out to the chat too. We got our friend Jordan in here. He's got some high praise for you, Matt. This Matt Waldman guy is super smart and has a great voice.
I could, Jordan, I am behind on my payments to you. Okay. So Jordan is great, man.
Watch out. He's going to send somebody to collect the VIG and everything.
He will. Jordan is great people, man. I love Jordan. That's a guy who knows football too. That's for sure.
We had him on the show, and we were going to profile Kyle Williams, who, hey, we might as well talk about him too today. But we were going to profile Kyle Williams with him. That was his draft crush. And we didn't even look at the NFL schedule, Matt, and it was on the first day of free agency. So we ended up just doing a live NFL free agency extravaganza thing with live reactions and didn't even get his input as much as we wanted to on the receivers. But incredibly smart guy, man.
Yeah.
Knows ball.
Yes.
No doubt.
Yes. I had a question for you guys, for Matt. Something we've asked all of our guests. We asked Jordan, we asked you. Before getting into your work and some of the guys in this draft class, talk to us a little bit about, like, we all have a draft story, like what got us into the draft. We all, like, I feel like it covers a whole wide range of different personalities, different ages, different walks of life. And so what's your story? How'd you fall in love with the draft?
I mean, I fell in love with football because I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the early 1970s. My first game was literally a Browns game in Cleveland Municipal Stadium, where the Browns, the cardiac kid version of the Browns, with Brian Sipe, who later ended up signing with Donald Trump's USFL New Jersey Generals and took that player away, that former MVP away from my team. That team with Brian Sipe, they were the cardiac kids, and they had a lot of comebacks. And the first game I saw was in Cleveland Municipal Stadium against Don Shula's Dolphins with Larry Zonka
Mm,
and Bob Greasy. And who knew
mm.
that I'd be studying his son Brian? But I was hooked I was a huge football fan probably since before I could even. Probably by the time I was even walking. Like, I remember being 3 years old and watching football.
Mm.
So I was a kid who skipped school. Oftentimes I'd go to the library and skip school and pick out books on running backs and quarterbacks from
Mm.
like the 30s and 40s. And I'd sit there and read them to my bewildered parakeet that was in the apartment complex I grew up in. So I was always a football geek, and wanted to play every day. And then I would say that what ended up happening is that over the years, as my love for football continued to thrive, just watching it, I started getting involved in fantasy football a little bit in workplace, and started enjoying. I started to see that I kind of had a kind of a knack. It wasn't like it wasn't anything developed, but I had a knack for being able to pick rookies and second year players, and they would make a big difference on my teams. And I realized, and it was early in fantasy. This was like the mid '90s, when you had to score things yourself, and you didn't. The internet was barely even used, if at all. We'd go to a bar and score the stuff. So I was like, I
Wow.
kind of enjoyed um, that part of it, and I had done some writing and some journalism and covered like the Georgia Bulldogs back in the day when Garrison Hurst was there, and there was this dude named Terrell Davis who looked pretty darn great, but
Not
the
bad.
the coach was not all that enamored with him. But yeah, so it was a fun time. And so I guess what ended up happening for me is I was at work and kind of miserable with what I was doing after a while, after about 15 years of it, and I was reading a Gilbrandt mock draft.
Mm.
And he was talking about a running back that he said if this guy was 10 pounds heavier and 2 inches taller, he'd be a top 5 overall pick. And I thought to myself, why is that? And then I realized pretty quickly, I was like, oh, well, I'm in corporate America. I know how this works. This whole draft capital, like risk
Yeah.
management thing, they, they have to factor in what might happen if it doesn't work, and they need to have their assets covered when it comes to how they do this. And I
Nice
started
pun.
thinking, yeah, right, thank you. And so I realized that I had been learning about all of this, like learn about how to evaluate talent in my day job, and had been doing it, developing people and working with people for performance for years in operations management. And then I started doing quality management, and I was working for a 10,000 employee company where I was an associate director for quality for these 70 plus branches, and had a few branches under me that were, basically taking this best practice on how to evaluate talent. And I thought, I could use this for football. I created the databases for this company. I've got the certifications on how to do this stuff. And I'm enjoy writing. That's kind of what I want to do. So yeah, let's do this for football. So what ended up, the end of the story basically went that I decided that I was going to do this in 2005. And I bought a TiVo, and I literally like just taped everything that I could possibly tape. I had about 80 or 90 discs that I had in a little bag. And I realized around March that I hadn't really gotten as much done as I wanted to. So through a family friend who lived in Athens, Georgia with us as well, she was a manager of a hotel just like walking distance from downtown, and I could get a friends and family rate. So to get away from the kids and my and my family to do this, I literally said, I'm taking a week. I'm going to use the friends and family rate. Drop me off. I'm going to bring my TV. I'm going to bring my computer. A CPU. I literally brought a CPU, a tape, and that was about it. And I did nothing but watch football for a week. And I thought, I'm heading into the door. I remember thinking to myself, I'm either going to hate this and never do this again, or I'm going to fall in love with this. There's no one way of doing this. And I worked almost 130 hours that week. I logged it to see what it was going to be. And I barely slept. I'd just get takeout, or I'll walk downtown to this local diner in Athens. It's kind of an institution. And when I came out, I'd only watched like 45 players. It sounds like it, compared to what I watch now, but I did 45 players and it was nowhere near like the level of what I'm doing now. I couldn't watch 45 players in a week anymore. I could probably watch 10 maybe, because of the detail that I do.
Yeah.
But I fell in love, and I was like, I got the bug, and I was like, you're insane, but this is what you want to do. And I knew. So my love for the draft came from evaluating talent more than anything. Cause I used to look at this and go, who would want to watch this? Like I'd look it on TV, and I went to the draft once. I went once with Sigmund Bloom and Cecil Lammey. And they were at Radio Row, and I was up in the balcony at Radio City Music Hall. I got tickets so I didn't have to stand in line, but I saw these guys standing in line, and one guy I remembered was wearing a Panthers jersey, and he had a Darius Hayward Bay Panthers jersey on it. I think that was the one. I think that it was. And I think he wanted Hayward Bay, or it was either Hayward Bay or Crabtree. He wanted one of those two. And I don't remember who they drafted, but whoever they drafted wasn't who he wanted. And I'm in this room filled with, just think of like New Yorkers, who like native New Yorkers, and they're all in the room, and they all think that they are like Joe Namath of of football analysis, and they're all arguing and talking with each other. And I'm sitting here just listening to all this, and then like the radio music, they call this guy for the Jaguars, and the kid with the Jaguars jersey standing at the balcony, like runs up to the steps, stands at the balcony, hoping it's his player, and they call somebody else. He takes off the shirt. He's got no undershirt on, so he just takes off the shirt, slams it to the ground, and just walks out of the draft. And I'm just literally thinking, you wait. I saw you like the morning before waiting in line. You've been there all night, and the next morning, and you saw literally 20 minutes of this and just left.
Waited all day just to throw a fit.
And I was just like, yeah, I don't understand the fandom part of it, but I love now that I evaluate things the way that I do. Now it's like, yeah, I get it, and if it's a chance to have a party, I know people enjoy that aspect. But guys like us, it's more like, how's our team going to get better? Who are these players? What's their story?
Right. My wife thinks that I am a sick person for wanting to watch tape that has no sound, no context to it, right? Like it's just guys playing football. She's like, they don't even have announcers. Like there's no commercials. Like she wants to watch the Super Bowl to watch the halftime show, right? So when I'm sitting there watching any kind of all 22, she's like, I think that there's something wrong with you. Like you should.
Yeah. I mean, that's the cool thing is like, it's funny when you're doing this. My wife will explain to people, they go, oh, I would love to watch football with someone like your husband. She goes, no, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
Really wouldn't. And Russ Landy tells a great story about it, and I'll shut up about this portion of it, but because we got receivers to talk about. But Russ Landy once told a story we did a podcast together for a few years. He's a former Rams and Browns scout and also does a lot in the CFL now. But he would say that he'd go to parties with his wife, and some guy would go, I've been trying to do this forever. I would love to. Can I watch football with you? He's like, yeah, sure. Come on over tomorrow. It's Saturday morning. Get here at 8 a.m. I'll be, we're going to watch a player or two. He's like, sure, great. Comes in all excited. They start watching tape, and by 11:30, this guy's starting to get antsy, and he's like, so what are we going to do for lunch? Where do you want to go? And Russell's like, oh, I made a couple of sandwiches. I got them in the fridge here. I'm just going to, I made one for you. Do you like tuna salad? Cause we're just going to be eating through lunch. I mean, I still got like 2 more games to watch on this guy. And the guy looked at him and said, yeah, you know what? This is not what I thought this was.
Not my jam.
Totally different, not my jam. All due respect, I'm jetting. And he's like, no,
Yeah.
no problem. And,
Yeah.
and he said, that's what I expected. That's usually the case. So yeah, it's a sickness.
It takes at least a somewhat afflicted person to enjoy doing it and to do it as a hobby, let alone as a job, right?
Yes.
All right, so let's get into it then. You brought up receivers. That's a great place to start, Matt. And I do think that that's a position group too that for the Carolina Panthers, we talked about Xavier Legette, but we just saw Jonathan Mingo, who was a second-round pick 2 years ago, already get traded. They've already cut bait there. Jalen Coker, undrafted free agent rookie last season, showed a lot of promise. Fan base is very high on him. It seems like the team may be as well. We've got Dave Canales as the head coach here in Carolina now. This is a developmental guy who has a history as a wide receiver coach, as a passing game coordinator, as a quarterback coach, and an offensive coordinator. So the trust that we are supposed to have, at least, right, with this head coach and with his offensive coordinator, Brad Idzik, is that they can bring along these young wide receivers and turn them into very good NFL football players. Ted McMillan is the name that is most widely associated with the Carolina Panthers. And some of that may be because of that draft capital that you talked about earlier, right? He was the one looked at as a consensus wide receiver one coming into this process. As things have unfolded a little bit more, you are starting to get a little bit more pushback, even from, the national media, the big talking heads that are wondering, does this guy separate enough? Does he have the speed to be a true wide receiver one? We know he's got the size to play the X, but is he really just a power slot? These are all questions that have been widely discussed. Matt, you have Ted McMillan as your wide receiver 5 in your rookie scouting portfolio this season. Speak a little bit about why he fell short of the wide receiver 1, if you will. And I know that your process is much more detailed and oriented from a process standpoint than just he fell short, he didn't reach his barometer. But speak to why you maybe see him a little bit lower than some of the consensus boards out there.
Sure, and I think at the end of the day, remember that a lot of people who are making the boards that they make are talking to NFL scouts and NFL people,
Right.
and NFL people also kind of have an old school mentality about size. So size can drive some things a little bit, especially if they think they might play a certain role. So does production, which can also be kind of a red herring for how you evaluate talent. The NFL still has some old school methods for how they evaluate things. Again, like the risk management aspect of it is, if you're productive, that's something you can rest your assets on and say, okay, this is a bullet point that I feel safe with. It's like saying you got a 4.0 GPA at Yale.
Right.
There may be 5 candidates who are way better than the Yaley, and the Yaley's probably maybe in therapy 5 times a week for things that may be debilitating to his job, and we wish him luck for that and hope that he can overcome those things, and he may still be a special human being. But they may need a little bit more work before they're in the job market, but
you can hang your hat on those credentials the same way that you can look at Tet and say, hey, he had 25 touchdowns the past 2 seasons.
That's right. Whereas like the kid from community college might be better right now and maybe better down the line, but he went to community college, and so it doesn't quite have the same thing you can rest on. You look stupid to the public when you say, I'd take this kid from the community college over the kid from Yale. So with Tet, it's not nearly that dramatic. I mean, he's literally by grade for me, a player that if they don't have any guys on the field who they believe are starter level players, or who can be an instant starter right away, or have that high end starter ability, if he's one of the, he has it. So he can come in, and if there's no other competition that is similar in skill set for him right now, he could come in and start right now for a team. And I think with Carolina, he has an opportunity to do that, even if there wasn't draft capital favoritism that goes on with the sunken costs of the contract. But with Tet McMillan, I think what I saw with him was, besides, we know that he catches the ball pretty well. He can make some fantastic catches from a high level skill set, like extending for the ball, winning against tight coverage, all the highlight level type of plays. He does have some clap attacking issues that he needs to fix. That's a little more like, say, Cortland Sutton at times, where Sutton's a good wide receiver. Had one of his best seasons this year, but has been riddled throughout his career with some catches where you go, he should have made that, at least 2 to 3 in a game where you go, that should have happened, but they just keep feeding him the ball and he ends up giving them production. But, you'd like to see him quell that a little bit. But I think the biggest thing for Tet that is separating him as wide receiver 5 from, say, maybe being wide receiver 3, in this class would probably be his ability to separate. Now, my buddy Matt Harmon, who does reception perception, is a fantastic analyst and does, some of the best work you're going to see with wide receivers in the football space or in the fantasy football space.
I know when I saw his receptive perception for Jalen Polk and where he had him and how he talked about him, it made me real sick to my stomach how high I was on Jalen last year. He immediately made me feel like a fool, and I was like, oh no, not Harmon.
It's funny how that goes. But see, I mean, here's some things. One of the things that Matt and I, the reason we love getting together is that we can talk about things that may fill in the blanks with his work or fill in the blanks with mine. Yep. So like he tracks success rates with routes and against press or zone. So he does that type of stuff, and it's very good. And it gives you a nice layer of information that's valuable for folks. And one of the things that I would say with Ted with that analysis is that it counts how successful you are. It counts the result, and then kind of gives you an indication about process. Where I'm more of I'm looking at the process, damn the result, And so what happens is that for me, when I watch Ted McMillan and I watch him, exhibit the skills that go into releasing from the line of scrimmage or releasing against a man and getting separation, it's like he has the tools in the toolbox, but doesn't have the craft with how to use them on an advanced job site. So he has the double ups. He has the 2 quicks and the 3 quicks, and he uses his hands in a variety of ways, and he knows all the different techniques of how to use them. But he doesn't use them with the patience and suddenness that you need to do to really trick NFL defenders. He doesn't always use the correct or the optimal use of his hands and feet in combination based on what leverage the defender is playing against him. So as a result of that, he's winning right now because of his athletic ability and that he knows how to use some footwork. Like if you're, right, it's like playing music. If I know some Eddie Van Halen licks on the guitar, to the average person, they might go, oh, wow, you're good, and you play on Instagram and you play some Eddie Van Halen licks and people are like, oh, wow, this is a really good guitar player. But if they've never really played with a band or they only know one song and all they know is these 3 licks and they don't know how to incorporate it into a variety of different types of music, they can't play. I mean, great musicians can take things that they heard from Eddie Van Halen and play it on a country album and it sounds great, or they can take blues or country licks and play it in a jazz setting and it sounds fantastic because they understand everything that goes into it to make it a craft. And these guys that are coming in most of the time don't have that. So Tet's one of those guys. So his success rate looks good is what we're looking on the screen. But when you're facing defenders who are really good at anticipating what you're going to do, and they know when you line up and how you line up and what the alignment looks like for the defense, they're like, okay, he's probably running a dig. So knowing that you're running a dig and that you're probably the first read, they're like, I'm not going to be fooled by a half-assed move that you're giving me here. You're going to have to really sell me on this idea, and you got to be efficient with it and to get that. That's where Tet's not there yet. So, he's there. He's good enough to start.
Sure.
But if you're going to put him in press man, on 3rd and 16, and Bryce Young's facing one of the top cornerbacks in the NFC, and it's late in the game, and everyone in the stadium knows that it's going to Tet on this comeback, and the defender's going to win that,
Right.
Whereas
Say
if
it's AJ Terrell, right, and the Falcons.
exactly, but if it was like Stephon Diggs, who was in his prime facing AJ Terrell, they're like, doesn't matter. That's an even
Feel fine
matchup.
about
It may be an edge to Diggs. We're going to get that 15 or 16
Yep.
that it is. And so that's where Tet has to travel, is clean up some of the hand stuff just a little bit, and get better with your craft with your releases and your routes. And if you do both of those things, where it's not just exhibiting the technique, but showing the craft and how to best execute it, he could be up there with anybody. But I see him more as kind of he maybe could be a Nico Collins type of guy. But
the comp that you had on there for him.
Yeah, he could be that if he really cleans all that up and shows the explosion that you want there. But I think at worst he's a Drake London type, which saw Drake London last year. They moved him inside a lot. They could still use him outside, but they moved him inside as the big slot, and he really thrived in that role. Yep. I think that Tet's kind of that player.
And that gets a little bit jumbled for Carolina because they've got Adam Thielen, who's going to play solely from the slot, basically. Jalen Coker's kind of like the slot guy in waiting. I think he's got a little bit of movability. I think you could play him at the flanker too. But then you got XL, who they want to be the X, like that was their plan for him when they drafted him. Yeah. I think he could do it, but could he also be more comfortable maybe being moved around? Possibly. So you just have this kind of log jam at the receiver group there. I do want to touch, because Jordan said that he was guessing you had Emeka Egbuka as your wide receiver 1. And he told on himself too. He hasn't even read the RSP yet. You got to get on that, Jordan. I told him that he's going to be surprised here, and then he thought maybe Matthew Golden because of the super cool first name. Good point there too.
Jordan
right?
is just playing us right now,
isn't he? I know, man.
He's making me laugh.
He's trolling.
Yeah. He's got a corporate America thing going on right now, doesn't he? But okay, so your number 1 wide receiver, and this is a guy that I like a lot, Matt, and I have Tet as my wide receiver 1. I thought that Luther Burden was your wide receiver 1. He came in within fractions of a point of being wide receiver 1 for me. I love his after the catch ability. That's obviously what is going to catch your eye first when you watch this guy. Sudden movements. The thing about Luther, I think that happened, it's almost prospect fatigue, if you will, but the tape in 2024 wasn't as dynamic as the 23, not as many of the big plays. Solely in the slot, basically. I think he had like 85% of his reps came from the slot in 24. A little bit more outside in his true freshman season at Missouri, and showed the ability. He looks comfortable playing on the boundary, in my opinion. He's got the movements to do it. He's got the physical ability, the athleticism. What is it about Luther Burden that you like? And I don't know if this is something that you do, Matt, but maybe I can ask you to do it here for us today. But if you were a team picking in the top 10, let's call you Carolina Panthers, Dan Morgan. Is there a wide receiver in this class that you're comfortable using a top 10 pick on? Or is this more of a look, man, if we could trade back and get some capital, these are guys that we'd feel much more comfortable in that, 15 to 25 range?
I'd say there are 2 that I'd feel comfortable picking in this range. And I think that they would have stacked up against my top 5 to 6 receivers last year. There are different types of players, but Luther Burden is 1A, of that, I would say. So I'm a big fan, and I understand how people look at Burden, and maybe based on the production last year and the usage, they see, especially the people who do modeling, any type of stat modeling. When they see the stat modeling, then they see, oh, he's an RPO screen player who runs crossers and slants at best and occasionally gets deep, but the volume of short passing he gets, that's a concern. He's, maybe he's more of a gadget guy, and we got to worry about that a little bit.
It's talked about like he's Malachi Corley is what I keep on talking about. Like, that's what it reminds me of, is the narrative behind it.
Yeah. the narrative is Malachi Corley, and I would say that that's kind of like saying that Jonathan Stewart was Tavon Austin. That's I mean it's just it doesn't make sense to me from
Right.
watching the
Yeah.
film. From watching the film, the and I'm going to get back to this stat modeling thing, but from what I saw with Burden was enough film to where when I grade, what I want to see is more than anything are techniques and concepts with route running that are repeatable and that are well defined, things that like wide receiver coaches teach. When I watch Luther Burden, his ability to sell stems, to set up breaks, to execute breaks, and then at the catch point, with if it's in the vertical game, to be able to track the football and use late hands to win it, to also perform jump up and throughs, which is when it's a back shoulder play or an underthrown ball in a contested situation where you want to stop, get the defender to overrun you if you can, and then jump straight up in the air and catch the ball. Now, that last part is the part that I keep harping on a lot this year to people, is that, over the years, I've watched so many great highlight worthy type of players that people get excited about perform jump up and throughs. And they're these big, tall, rangy, long dudes who are like literally getting parallel with the ground to extend for the ball. And they go, see that? He's unbelievable. He's making these unbelievable catches. And you go, yeah, it's an unbelievable display of athletic ability. And if you had tracked the ball early enough, you never had to do any of it. I brought up Stephon Diggs earlier because he's a great example of a short wide receiver who in his prime could play big in those situations. And actually, you had the best one. He was a 5'9" receiver who played like he was 9 feet 5 inches tall, and Steve Smith, who could basically go up and win. And the reason he could is that he often tracked the ball early enough so that he could jump straight up in the air and catch the ball, rather than have to jump late and then lean back and open his entire body to a defender. And then much less, you can't even get both feet on the ground. And if you are trying to turn to stay in bounds, now you got to avoid landing on the ball. So you added like 3 things, like 4 things plus the pull down, to pull away. You've added 4 things that you now have to do that you probably didn't have to do if you jumped early enough to catch the ball. So I would look at, Burden. He's very good at tracking in that respect. And one of the best things he does downfield is that when you watch him play against quarterbacks who are, working outside the pocket, he knows how to uncover late in the route, to bait the defender and uncover just as the ball is going to be thrown. So in compressed areas like the red zone or in scramble drill situations downfield, he's a guy that a quarterback's going to have a lot of fun being able to target late in a route. He'd match up so well with Bryce Young, who can extend plays in the pocket and who throws with placement and touch and has a really good sense of anticipation. So once they get on the same page, you're going to see what Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey did last year, in times where McConkey would uncover late in the red area, and early in camp, you'd hear Justin Herbert say, this guy plays like a 5-year veteran or a 7-year veteran. And that's what he was talking about, is that they're on the same page looking at all these coverages and knowing how to do that. But you can see even there, that's not much of a late back shoulder, that what he did there when he caught that. He didn't open up his entire body. You can see he didn't even leave his feet on that one at the boundary that they just showed. There's another one where he didn't, he's just jumping straight up and down for the most part. Those kinds of skills are great coming into play. And then when you look at all the after the catch stuff, which is what everybody else was talking about, I think his yards after the catch have been better than most. It's like a ridiculous number in terms of how high it is compared to everybody else. And just every time we're seeing these back shoulder plays, he's still in position to run or keep his feet.
Still got balance, right?
Yes. This is the one I always remember.
Yes.
That late one right there. And then there's probably one somewhere around here. I think this is the one where he uncovers late. See how he uncovers late on that play?
He's got terrific body control too, right?
He just completely played. He completely played the safety
Yep.
on this play because he's
Mhm.
showing the hand and pointing inside, and he knows the ball is going to be coming outside, and he baits that the entire time and
Yep.
uncovers late. This is pro level wide receiver craft
Mhm.
when you're looking at that kind of thing. And yes, there are a lot of college players who can do that, but they can't do everything that Burden is doing. So
Right.
the level of technique and craft is really strong. He's not just this guy that we're watching in this clip that people
This
know
guy
him
is so
for.
fun though, right?
He is fun. But so when we ended on Luther Burden, let's put it this way. People go, well, the models are scary. I bet the models were scary for Brandon Ayuk too, because when I
Mm.
watched that dude at Arizona State, he was a slant route runner who ran
Yep.
occasional crossing routes and RPOs and screens. And people were like, this is a really good route runner, a budding technician. And now you look at him in San Francisco, and you could argue that he's probably one of the top 12 route runners in the league. Like he's that good as a route specialist, and his game's far more expanded than what it looked like at Arizona State from the surface level. And that's my comp for Luther Burden is Brandon Ayuk.
Yep.
I think
I love
he's
that.
actually has a chance to be better than Brandon Ayuk. So
Wow.
yeah, if you give me him, I'll be happy. Whereas like Travis Hunter, as an example, is my number 2 guy.
Mhm.
I love what he does, but I see him as kind of a maybe the next level of Chris Olave. But I see
Mhm.
him sometimes jumping late to targets, and it looks great. Um, he gets pinned at the boundary more often than I would expect from a player that maybe it's not fair to say, well, you're a top cornerback.
Yeah.
You know, you should be able to do this, but it's kind of like telling a trumpet player that he should know how to play the piano as well as he plays trumpet, you know? So it's kind of like, he's really good at both. And that's the other question that we all have is how are teams going to want to use him? Because he seems to, he's dead set on wanting people to know that he's Jim Thorpe. Okay.
Yep.
Like that's
Right.
basically what that's what he wants to do. And
It's
look,
important.
he lives down he grew up, probably 20 minutes from where I live right now. And I wouldn't mind seeing one of these kids with the Georgia clay where I think, football players, Georgia football players are Martians.
Yeah, there's
We
something
have this,
magic in that
we
red
got
clay, huh?
there's something magic in that red clay. I think it's from another planet, so maybe that's part of what it is that you get a mouthful of that and, maybe you
That's what
grow from
turns you
there.
into the next level.
That's what gets you that next level thing. But seriously, Burden's just a little more polished. But
Yeah.
if you told me that Tet McMillan was your best fit for your team,
Mhm.
I'm not going to argue with taking him over Luther Burden. I
Right.
would prefer Luther Burden, and I'd probably take him over anybody in just about any situation, as long as as long as his off-field behavior isn't a
Mm.
problem. And from what I'm hearing, again, I don't add this into my reports, but
Right.
from what I'm hearing, he's got a little bit of wide receiver in him, diva in him, but it's not out of control, at least from what we're seeing. So, I'll take him.
It seems like the diva gets reined in a lot if the team is playing well and there's not like misuse of what they're trying to do on the field. And so you kind of have to put some faith in your coaches at that point to be like, look, you got this incredible talent. Yeah, he might get annoyed with you if you're
Yep.
not doing well and doing things that can make him be in position to succeed. But I don't have a problem with the guy who's that passionate about being in the best position to succeed. I have more of a problem taking a guy that doesn't have the physical ability to succeed when you put him in the position, right?
Sure.
So Luther Burden, I love him, and I think that it's awesome that you bring up the off-field stuff or the character questions. I appreciate that you don't put it in your evals because it is still a way to have a very uniform way of saying, look, I want to evaluate the guy on what he does on the football field. Everything else, leave that to the front office and everybody to decide, is he someone that fits in our culture? But Luther, I hadn't heard anything that was so crazy either on the
No.
off field. It didn't seem like there are some guys in this class on the defensive side of the ball that have allegations against them that are very serious, right?
Right.
And Luther Burden, you're talking about being maybe a little bit dramatic sometimes, or maybe not being the most focused in every single meeting or something like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. All I know is that he would be one of those players that you can use him working across the backfield and using him as a runner. You can use him in the RPO screen game. You can use him in the vertical game. If you need him to be your X on occasion with certain matchups, he can do that and win. He'd ideally be a flanker for me, but he can also work in the slot. So you can move him around. And when you have an offense, when you have the Panthers offense the way it is right now with its personnel, you may need a guy who you can move around some so that you can get the best work out of the other dudes where it's a little more ambiguous. So to me, he's a plug and play option right now and would be very dangerous for make the Panthers offense more dangerous, right away.
Edgar, do you have anyone in mind that you want to ask Matt about? Maybe that's been linked to Carolina. And we've had a couple offensive guys come in on 30 visits, right?
Yeah, I guess the other wide receiver that both Ricky and I like, and you have in your report, and we haven't really talked really specifically about your portfolio, but we put the link out there. You've been doing this, you've been doing this for years, right? How long has it been since you had your first one?
20 years. This is my 20th year of publication.
Oh, yeah. So we just asked, don't be like Jordan, support the work. I know that.
God.
I know Dane has the beast, but Ricky and I were just talking about like this is over 1,200 pages of just pure details and processes information, and so love looking at it after the draft. And so just if you want to support and see more of the things that we're talking about, you'll get your money's worth and more.
And Matt does a post draft version too, don't you, Matt?
Yep, and it's all one price. I mean, usually the response is holy bleep from people who've got it the first time, and then they're like, how do you charge so little for all this information? Right. And then it's like, I'm going to be a customer for life. And then after that, it's like, why don't you charge more? I'd pay more, so it's, so you're going to get a lot. And I know that we're giving you a heavy sell if you're listening out there. But
it's an appropriate sell.
I say I've been pleasantly shocking readers since 2006, and I wanted to make something where it fulfilled its promise. And
Matt, while you bring up the cost, people purchase the guide. Are you still doing the proceeds to the Darkness to Light Foundation?
Yep, still doing that. So I give up to a certain percentage of sales. I give a certain percentage of sales up to a certain amount to Darkness to Light. I think we've raised close to $70,000 in the past 10 years that we've been doing this. So it's a great organization, d2l.org. It's basically protecting children from sexual abuse by training communities and individuals and entities like Penn State and Michigan State who needed to go through that after how they fumbled all of it. It's a great cause, obviously. So, the RSP, you're going to get more than your money's worth with it. And it's one of the two most looked at draft guides by NFL decision makers who use it as a cross reference. And Danes is the other. Danes is the beast. I joke that if Danes is the beast, my little bird is really just disguising himself from being Godzilla, because after all, he's a reptile. They're descendants of reptiles. So, I don't know who won Godzilla and King Kong, but they got mutual respect. So we're good.
No one has to win, right? It's just
no one has to win. Everybody wins. Sells tickets. Everybody had a good time, and the
fans
good.
Win.
Yeah, exactly.
And shout out to your wife Alicia too. You gave her a really nice section to shout out in the RSP. I love the way that you dote on her and for her and her patience for allowing you to let your sickness transpire into publication.
Well, she met me in year 2, and in year 2 I had turned down opportunities to do other work with bigger entities, and I remember they were like, well, you could write for our draft guide, and be kind of somewhat like puzzled by that I would do this. But and then I would, back in that day, I had started dating again, and I remember like I would meet people, and I was 35 years old and starting over, and it was like I wasn't the ready-made spouse that a lot of people are looking for. But my wife saw me and saw what I was doing, and she was just like, she was an entrepreneur herself, and we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, yeah, this is, she saw me, I saw her, and she's a big reason why I'm able to do what I've been able to do, mainly just because she's been supportive and willing to allow me to do the hard work and be supportive in ways to help me do some of the hard work. And as a result of that, we've been we're a pretty equal partnership in how things go. But we've each have had to help the other in ways to get to where we are. And so it's I wouldn't be able to do this without her. So for sure.
Absolutely.
But she doesn't watch any football, because when she does, she expects she watched a Georgia Alabama game once, and I pretty much realized that if we had had another kid and he played football, that she'd be one of those moms that would probably be getting in fights in the stands, because she would have said she would have wanted to see our son be a safety and clothesline somebody, and thought that might be football. She doesn't realize that wrestling and football are two different things.
Two different things, yeah.
And that she watched too much Yahoo McDaniel back in the day in North Carolina.
So just we'll jump to another prospect. So selfishly, looking at, as Ricky said, some of the people that the Panthers are looking at, if they don't reach for somebody or grab somebody in round 1, a very popular name that could be out there at 57 at the end of round 2 or round 3 is Iowa State wide receiver Jalen Noel. And so maybe you talk a little bit about, in the details and the processes, things that you saw that maybe other people, the mainstream or the casuals aren't seeing, that that you see are real strengths to his game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jalen Noel, if we're going to sum it up just quickly, I would say he's probably what a lot of people envisioned John Mechie would become, the Alabama receiver, before his illness, unfortunately. Or I would say he's bargain Matthew Golden. That
you had that in there on the cup, Matthew Golden in the same class.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could say, you get Matthew Golden now, but you might be able to get a lot out of Jalen Noel a little bit later. That's in the realm of Matthew Golden. Very quick, great change of direction, quickness, good acceleration. Obviously, the speed was nice. What you see with him is that he tracks the ball well, and you can see that right there. Late hands, being able to work between two defenders. He's also very good after the catch. He gives you that quickness after the catch, so that you can see here. I mean, just very smooth, being able to see the field the way he needs to and transition the way that's important. But he can work the middle of the field well. You see how he got positioned there with his back to the defender, because the defender's going to be a lot closer than him facing the mean green in that case, on that particular play. But he can give you work at flanker. In certain cases, he could probably win outside a little bit at the X, but you'd probably prefer him as a flanker. And then you could work him, flanker slot type of work with his quickness as well. But he works well with his quarterback. You can see that he's a fairly good pass catcher. I would say the biggest issue with him, which is what some people say is a strength, is that he's a good zone player, but he has some moments where he's crossed up with his quarterback on when he should settle and when he should continue running across the field. So that means that maybe he's not always seeing the defense the same way his quarterback is, and needs to work on that. But you can see that when he's on and he's right about what he's seeing, he's polished. So to me, he has essentially an instant starter grade. So when people hear that, I like to point out that, like I did in the beginning of the episode, is that a lot of if you're entering a league with players who have with a lot of players who on your bench have an instant starter grade, then you may not be playing right away because they're veterans and they know the system better and they don't have to acclimate. But he's a guy that, when called upon and once he acclimates, he should be able to deliver starter production for you and improve from there. So I think it would be a fine pick. And if you didn't go Luther Burden early, or if you didn't go with a guy like Matthew Golden, you could look at Jalen Noel and feel like you're getting a player who gives you that skill to play a couple of roles and who can really work all over the field for you.
They've got a emphasis, I think, and you can see it. The other guy that they brought in is Jalen Lane. We could touch on him real quickly, but they've got a emphasis on quick speed, versatility, maybe even some special teams contributions. Canales has talked, in detail about wanting guys that come in here to fill out this roster that have special team ability. So it's possible, especially with Jalen Lane, he's got a lot of experience playing special teams. I think Jalen Noel reminds a lot of people about the Carolina receiver that you spoke about earlier, Matt, in Steve Smith, because of that kind of like smaller but compact build. Noel plays a little bit of a different brand of football, in my opinion, than Steve Smith played. But also, when you bring up the Noel and Golden thing, the interesting thing to me there, Matt, Golden had the 40 time that raised everybody's eyebrows, right, at the combine and made everyone look at him a little bit differently. Noel, I think, plays a little bit faster on tape. Like the speed shows up more often on tape for him, at least that deep speed, being able to get behind the defense. The question I had for you with Noel, when you spoke about his ability to sit or know when to kind of settle in a zone, right? Is that more of that communication thing that you're talking about with the quarterback of not being on the same page, as opposed to a spatial awareness kind of issue? Because Panthers fans are traumatized, man. We saw Jonathan Mingo literally try to make a catch and throw his ass out of bounds, where he could have just put his feet down on the grass. And so we've got people that are a little bit nervous about having a guy that maybe doesn't know exactly where his body is on the field.
Well, I think for what we're seeing with with Noel, is that he knows where his body is on the field. Sometimes what's happening is that he may just not recognize the coverage well enough where he's reading the triangle of defenders,
Gotcha.
usually two DBs and a linebacker, two linebackers and a DB, and maybe he misdiagnoses whether it's man or zone. And as a result, with man, you want to usually continue running across the field and not stop. And then if you get run out of area to run to, you either reroute or you're trying to settle before you even get close to that man. If you are in zone, you're trying to settle between that triangle of zone defenders and give yourself enough space and create a friendly position to the target. So I think they're different things. I think fundamentally, Noel isn't going to cause fans to worry. But maybe some fans will overreact if he and Bryce Young aren't on the same page with a certain route disguise, and he ends up continuing to run, and the ball's thrown behind him, and they're like, Young intercepted it, and then the savvier person's going to say, no, Noel should have stopped and settled on this particular route, and then people are going to freak out about that. But it's more of a lapse than it is a bad habit.
Gotcha. Perfect. He fits with an anticipatory thrower like Bryce, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think he can. I think he does that very well. He played with a quarterback for 1 year by the name of Hunter Deckers, who's ESPN's talked about because he had he gambled some money on DraftKings that his dad set up an account for, and he got basically banned from Division I football and played at Western Iowa this year. I think or Iowa Western this year, and he has NFL ability, maybe not starter skill, but he wins. He throws the ball into tight windows very well, makes a lot of NFL throws, and Noel was on the receiving end of those types of anticipatory tight window throws, placed where it needs to be. I think he can do that well.
Beautiful. Edgar, I know that Edgar has a time constraint, so he may have to pop off for a little bit. He may join us again. And Matt, you just let me know, man, whenever you have to get out of here as well. I could sit here and talk ball with you for 6-7 hours. So
you're gonna
yes, thank you, Matt.
No problem, Edgar. It's nice meeting you finally.
So, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got some friends out in LA. If I ever get out there,
there you go.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I could do a little longer for sure. Let's go.
Let's hit a couple more then, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
All right. So Jalen Lane was one guy that we just spoke about, right? You've got him, man, Matt. You've got him low.
Yeah.
And that made me nervous because I like Jalen Lane, but I think that I am a little bit of a sucker, right? For Carolina, we have lacked speed, man, and explosiveness. We just don't have any explosivity on this offense. Chuba Hubbard is our favorite player here in Carolina from an offensive standpoint, and he is reliable. He's north-south. He has improved so much from where he was when he came in. He had some injuries to the core and stuff. He's improved so much, but we don't have that home run artist. I think that they tried really hard with Jonathan Brooks and Xavier Legette to maybe add some of that skill set. Jalen Noel seems to have that. He has the ability to take a 7-yard completion 80 yards if he's got open grass. What is it that gives you a little bit of pause? And I'm going to give you a couple names so that you could just kind of run through them quickly on the same subject. Because Kyle Williams is another player that seems to be getting a lot of love, especially recently. His name has taken a huge boost in the draft community, at least online, that I'm seeing. There are people talking about him as a potential top 50 player in the class. You've got him at wide receiver 27, which I don't think. Look, I'm not as high on Kyle Williams as everybody else. I'm not as low as 27 either. But I look at it differently than you, right? I think I have him in the 15 range, 15, 16. Speak a little bit about Jalen Lane, Kyle Williams, and I'm going to throw one last one in there because you've got him so high and I like him, but he's got those character questions. Isaiah Bond. Those are three guys that bring the speed element.
Sure. Well, just to start with Kyle Williams, because Jordan mentioned Jordan liked him, and you mentioned the ranking. This is again like when you're just looking at talent and how the separation is very small sometimes with a lot of these players. So my 27th player being Williams, if he earned one more point,
right,
which is easy to do, if he earned one more point on my board, his score would be 83.4. He would be wide receiver 18. If he earned a point and a half, which is also fairly easy to do, he would be at wide receiver 15. So it's not much of a difference when you look at those guys. It's also about flavor, what you're looking for. So with Williams, let's talk about Williams because I think he's a good compare and contrast with Jalen Lane, who I have even lower. So Kyle Williams and Jalen Lane both are good return men. They can offer you explosive plays in the return game. They also can offer you explosive plays in open space. On zone routes that develop working across the field and deep overs, play action passes occasionally where I think they get the ball in their hands in open space and they can be deadly. I would say the difference between these, I would also say this, the reason they're a little lower, though, I would say for me, Kyle Williams' grade is a contributor, an instant contributor. He can already, if you want to use him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 every week and get him targets, he's going to give you something. That's a good grade. And then he's going to build from there. He's not that far away from, say, a guy I was high on a few years ago who was higher on my board because there were fewer receivers who had this number of grades, but it was Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed was one of my favorite players. His grade was not much higher than Kyle Williams. The difference is that Kyle Williams has some issues fighting the football. And so there's some bad habits with his that I think he can overcome, but he may always have lapses with them, even if he cuts back on the frequency. But he tends to clap targets that he shouldn't. And then he ends up fighting the ball, and that can be a problem. Jalen Lane is a serial clap attacking, difficult issues being able to really catch the ball, and he's more of a zone man than he is a man-to-man guy. So Kyle Williams offers a little bit more man-to-man right now. Jalen Lane still has work to do as a man-to-man route runner. And
that affects how you can use them as well, like alignment-wise, how you deploy them.
Yeah, he's more of a gadget player right now in a Tavon Austin type of role or a Wan'Dale Robinson type of role than he is a straight up, matchup threat. You've got to create a lot for him to do what he does well. And that means that, you have some packages you can put in there, but then those packages become predictable. And then you got to redo the packages so that the defense goes, yeah, we've seen this package on film. And then they nullify it. And then they can't use that. They can only use the play once a week or once every 2 to 3 weeks. And it's, so he's not. Whereas Williams, you could see growing into more of a man-to-man threat as long as he wins the ball better. I think that, in contrast with those two guys, I would just say a guy like Jalen Royals, while he has some minor catch issues, and he also has some minor lapses in the same way that Noel does with zone and man occasionally. I would rather have him than Jalen Royals pretty much every day. Than Jalen Lane. I'd rather have Jalen Royals better than Jalen Lane. Who was the third guy that we?
I feel like it's like a Freudian slip because we've talked about Jalen Royals now like 3 or 4 times without talking about him. You like Jalen Royals? Because that's a guy that I would love to see them bring in. I said something the other day, just randomly thinking about it. I wish that they would bring him in for a 30 visit because he seems like he has this skill set and this alignment versatility. His after the catch ability, right, is also a point where they really got to add that to this team.
Yeah.
He seems like a really good addition too.
Maybe they don't need to bring him in.
Bring him in. Maybe they already feel good about the evaluation.
Yeah, maybe they don't have any questions for him.
Playing the cards close to their chest type of thing.
Yeah, maybe so.
Okay.
So who was the third guy that you were?
Isaiah Bond, your wide receiver 4. Yeah.
That's the personality thing that we need to be careful about with him.
Yes.
Is it Jermaine Burton-esque? Or is that
and that's the name that they associated it with, right? Didn't someone say we're teetering on Jermaine Burton level here?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that can either be unfair to a player, and it's because teams are using shorthand to kind of give you an idea. Right. But it's also, it varies from team to team, and I would say, without going too deep into it, I would say that just as much as there's variance on how well GMs evaluate what their scouts put out there and create good decisions, there's also huge variation on how teams assess character. The Chicago Bears I would joke, were the teetotalers of the NFL for a while and would move away from players who actually were very good kids who maybe just did some things that they shouldn't, like it was either a one-off thing or it's something that, like Jimmy Smith, who smoked pot before it was okay to smoke pot.
A bit in college. Wow.
They looked at him and said, he's a bad character kid, and took him off their draft board. And the Ravens were like, look, everybody smokes pot in the NFL.
Right.
We make the tests. We make the tests so that you have to be a complete dumbass to fail one of these tests. You've got to be really immature and unprofessional, because we literally telegraph. It's literally like when the cops show up. I mean, this well, in the South, this happens all the time. When the cops show up at a local speed trap and they literally are there, but they're not ticketing anybody. They're kind of going, listen, just slow down.
Show of force, if you will, right?
Yeah,
we're sitting here, we're trying to get you to slow down by our presence, but we really don't want to mess up your day.
Yeah, we don't want to mess up your day. If this keeps happening, we keep seeing this, we're going to start ticketing people, but let's just show up, and do that. And that's kind of what the NFL is doing, is kind of, they make it easy, because they know, and they know now too, that marijuana is probably a better painkiller anyway, more effective one without some of the effects of pharmaceuticals.
The pills, right?
Yeah. I think that there was a lot already pretty much known, but from an optics standpoint, they couldn't go there.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about. So when you look at,
if you were testing positive back then, though, it's almost a disregard for like the process, and like, hey, this guy just really is like neglecting every kind of like thing we're trying to give him to help him out in this situation to avoid issue. But if you have that much disregard for authority and stuff like that, it's a bigger red flag.
Exactly. Your maturity and professionalism are questionable. And we wonder if we can rely on you. Whereas if you've got this all buttoned up and you know how to take care of it and manage it, you're fine. And Jimmy Smith was fine. Yeah. So on that standpoint, you look at Isaiah Bond, it could be bad. It could just be more Luther Burden-like, if Luther Burden turns out to be all right. But on the field, Isaiah Bond, to me, has the most palpable burst acceleration that you see of any of the wide receivers in this class. He uses it extraordinarily well as a route runner. There's a lot of fast dudes who don't attack their stems with the ferocity that Bond does. So he's using that speed, especially on routes that break back to the quarterback or break inside or outside. He'll accelerate into the top of his stem, whereas a lot of guys are kind of slowing down too much and tipping it off, and their shoulders come up and telegraphing what's going on. And then you're looking, and I think Ted McMillan does that a little bit from time to time, where he telegraphs.
Does some of that have to do with the ability to decelerate like easily? Is that a big portion of that?
Yeah. It's can you decelerate? Can you drop your hips into the top of the stem so that you are coming to a sudden stop? And Bond does that really well. He has good route running skills, and he also, like Luther Burden, uncovers well late in routes. So he can make those adjustments where you're like, there's an Alabama game where I think it's Alabama Auburn from either a year or 2 years ago, where it's late in the game and the quarterback throws the ball. I think it was Milroe. Milroe throws the ball early enough that Bond has to create against the defender to fool the defender with the ball in the air to win a ball in the left corner of the end zone late, and then make a nice adjustment with his feet, stay in bounds, and it was still in tight coverage. And that's the kind of play that you see in Burden, is the kind of play Bond can use. I see Bond honestly as kind of a potential T.Y. Hilton-esque type of player who you could put in the slot early if you've got good receivers, and he can be that big play slot guy who just scares the bejesus out of safeties, or God forbid a linebacker if you're the opposing defense. And then eventually you can put him outside, and he could be your number one, like T.Y. Hilton had to be with Andrew Luck sometimes. And he can be that guy that wins some of those contested targets and runs good enough routes to where, because he uses his speed as a bully pulpit to dictate timing routes, that he could be good. He has a few lapses with drops with certain types of targets where they're placed, but they're not horrible. To me, if suddenly, like, he gets ticked off that all the people are talking about him the way they're talking about him, and he grows up, if he does need to grow up, or he has that edge, he plays with that edge like Steve Smith did, which was, you knew Steve Smith was like dynamite with a short fuse, but it wasn't lit all the time. But if somebody lit it,
but if you light it,
if you light it, it's going to be a problem. But if he can play with that edge, maybe you could see him be an Isaac Bruce type of receiver. I don't think he's going to ever get there, because that's pretty
it's lofty,
lofty company. But it's on the scale, and I could see how it could happen. I just wouldn't bet on it. But I could bet on T.Y. Hilton, and that's a pretty nice bet.
That's a nice career too, right? If you land and you settle for T.Y. Hilton, I think that's worth the investment, especially if you're talking about. And look, right now, the way that he's projected to be selected in this draft, you're not looking at more than a second, third, potentially even with these character concern, fourth round draft investment. If he slides for any reason down to pick 111 or pick 114 that Carolina has in that fourth round, I might beat Roger Goodell to the podium myself. I might be the one who's calling that pick.
Yeah, and when you look at this conference, this division, listen.
Yeah.
Michael Penn, I think in 3 years, it's going to be Atlanta and Carolina with these fantastic quarterback battles between Bryce Young and Michael Penix. I think the Saints are scrambling right now, trying their best to find some quick solution where they think they're better. They thought were better than they were, but their offensive line choices really failed them. And the Derek Carr situation is pretty much at the end, and they don't really have anybody there. And they've got some unhappy skill talent, or talent on their way out or at the end of their careers. So it's Atlanta, Carolina. Baker Mayfield's going to help the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hold in the road as the top team in the division right now on paper. And certainly they're trying to hold on for as long as they can, because they feel like they got the band that's still good enough to be back together. And I think they're right about that. But they're not so right that Carolina or Atlanta couldn't be on the quick come up and overtake them for the division, even this year, depending on injuries or certain
what
developments.
They do on defense and all kinds of other things, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shift real quick, Matt, and we'll touch on a few more of these other ones, and then I'll let you get out of here, man. I appreciate, first of all, thank you again, man, for coming on in the time. This is, last year, man, it was my favorite episode of the Bo Body Show. My favorite thing was sitting here and we talked about it. I remember staying up, man, for days, and I apologize that I didn't do the graphics for this episode that I did for the Bo Body, but I remember staying up the days before, and I was like, I got to make this perfect, man. I can't believe that Matt's coming on the show and I get to talk to him. I read your
Man.
publication, man. I'm a huge fan. This year, we're in the process of actually making a Carolina Panthers specific draft guide.
Nice.
Edgar and I. So we have been putting a ton of time and effort into that, and Draft Crush unfortunately fell victim at times. So
well, you
today,
got the
man,
walk-up music, dude. I mean, that's the best thing I've heard on any podcast right there.
That's my
the
compensation.
best walk-up music of any podcast I've ever been on.
I love that,
dude.
Thank you, man. You know, our idea behind the show, Matt, Edgar was a big fan of Fran Duffy's old Journey to the Draft series that he did.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, how do we make like a throwback vibe to this show, right? And I was like, how about a really nice synthesizer type of intro with some old school, you know, like camcorder style video coming in, and that's just kind of what took place and what that materialized into. All right, switching into different positions though. Running back. Let's just talk about the guys that Carolina has been linked to, because I want to make sure that we give an idea of what these guys can do. RJ Harvey and Jaquez Hunter are the two guys that have been brought in for 30 visits. You're laughing when I mentioned Jaquez Hunter. What is it about Jaquez that elicits that response?
I like Jaquez Hunter. I'm a fan. He's he's kind of that wild card in this draft because he has really strong contact balance for his size, very fast, plays with intensity. You see you see the ability to catch the ball is pretty good. He just has some work to do with, he's a gap runner more than he is a zone runner. So if you're just going to use gap plays a good bit with him early on, maybe have him run some screens, maybe some leak routes, you can get some explosive play out of him, and then he can grow from there. I would say he's more advanced than Chuba Hubbard was coming out of Oklahoma State. So if you like Hubbard, and I know, and Hubbard has worked, you could tell that this dude has worked hard to be the player he is. And I'm really thrilled for him to see that, because you don't always see players grow that steadily the way that he got
rewarded with the contract too. The franchise gave him their vote of confidence as well.
Yeah, he deserved it. So I think that you could see the same thing happen with with a player like Jaquez Hunter if he has that work ethic. That's a big if. We don't know, but he has the talent. Harvey is one of those players that would be higher on my board if he could hold on to the football better. And if he made a little bit better decisions with certain gap plays. With gap plays, he tries to cut things back, and you don't want to cut back gap plays very often. He's got the athletic ability to do it, but what he tries to do in college and gets away with, it's not going to be as frequent in the NFL. It'll happen sometimes, but he's going to get his coaches mad. Because
so it's more about like the habit forming, that like getting that mindset of this is what I want to do. This is how I attack and approach.
Yeah, like managing the game. It's like a quarterback who doesn't throw the ball away in the red zone or black zone when there's pressure, and he tries to stretch it out so long that he gets sacked or throws an interception. That's the kind of thing that Harvey does as a decision maker between the tackles. He's a good he's like a good zone draw play type of guy. He catches the ball really well. He gives you an element as a left-handed former dual threat quarterback who you can use him on option plays. And he gives you that Tariq Cohen kind of vibe, and so, you guys are familiar with him as an HBCU A&T Aggie, right?
And the Panthers even tried to bring him in 2 years ago when he was on his, journey back after all of his injuries.
Yeah, so you get a Tariq Cohen kind of vibe out of him. He's just got to he's got to manage the game better and reduce mistakes, because fumbles, from at least a 6-year study I did on the past 6 years of backs, I looked at those 6 years of backs that I evaluated, and when they are below a certain threshold, only 10% of those backs over those 6 years earn production commensurate with the top 24 backs in a season. Only 10% of them ever did it once. Only 3% of them ever did it at a top 10 level. So, when we're talking about being one of the top 2 backs in a rotation on a team, it's not common for it to happen if you have issues. Now, I think his fumbling rate is slightly above the threshold, but it still needs to get a little bit
But
better,
it's still
because
got to be addressed.
if it were addressed, he would be higher on my board.
Is that a similar sentiment then for a guy like Bashul Tootin?
Yes.
Because Tootin had some ball security, but the comps that you had, and you do a great thing with the comps too. I appreciate this about how you go about it, Matt, is you have like a range instead of just giving one player and saying, hey, this is the way this guy plays. It's really difficult to do that, first of all, and you have this crazy encyclopedia of football knowledge to be able to sit here and say, this is who this reminds me of, especially when you range from the time periods that you do, right?
Yeah.
Like for Bajul Tootin, man, you got Marshall Falk is on one end of the spectrum, then Charlie Garner and Jahmyr Gibbs, all on the same line. I was like, if that's not the epitome of Matt Waldman's knowledge and database of football players, I don't know what else could be. So Bajul, though, this is a guy that's very explosive, speed, a pretty aggressive runner. But is it just the ball security that prohibits him from kind of reaching that top tier level for you?
No, but it's certainly the biggest thing. Like if he fixed that, he could have been among my top, probably among my top 10 to 12 backs, and maybe even higher than that. But the issue with him is the ball security combined with pass protection. That's got to get better. He does some things well, but he has to be better at diagnosing certain blitz types and getting into position and being in a position where he can punch consistently and not tip off what he's doing. And then on top of that, he's a better gap runner than he is a zone runner. So for me, why players often get ranked lower in the pre-draft is, I'm not studying for the Carolina Panthers.
Right.
I'm studying for every team. So the more you can do at a high level, or if you do something, you could be more likely or not, the guys at the top of my board at running back, most of them can run zone and gap plays at a high level, or they can run one at a high level and everything else is great. Yeah. So you're like, there's no way. Like Caleb Johnson is a good example of a guy who's in my top, in my top 10, who, that he's probably going to be an outside zone player. That's what everyone's saying, that he fits. And it's true. He can do some gap plays, but he's best in outside zone. Well, he does everything else well enough that that a team's going to look at him and go, we can plug him into our outside zone. And if it's not this year, next year, he's going to have success. Whereas a guy like Tootin, you go, yeah, we can plug him into a gap scheme, but we still need to make sure he can pass protect and hold on to the football. And he still also takes chances and risks on things that we can give him situational play right now. And he's going to be exciting and fans are going to love what they see and they're going to demand for more. But we know he's not completely ready yet for that big time role.
That makes a ton of sense, man. That's a great way of thinking of that too. So real quick, just to touch on these running back rankings, and we don't have to get into them, but there were some things that really stood out to me. I love too the way you preface this, Matt, and you say in there, you're like, if this is your first time reading, I'm aware that these rankings may be surprising or jarring to you, right? To see some of these names where they are, but that you're comfortable, man, with the variance of outcomes. You've done this long enough that you understand, hey, look, I'm going to miss on some of these. I'm also going to be incredibly right about some of these that other people are not. You've got Quinshawn Judkins as your running back too. I like that a lot. Taj Brooks was the name that stood out the most to me. You got Taj as your running back 3. Taj is an interesting player. What is it about Taj Brooks that you felt so, or that he graded so strongly about?
Yeah, Taj Brooks is probably the sweet spot of the type of players that I like, that I've always grown up learning what makes a good running back. And there are two guys that I was high on that a lot of people weren't early on in my career when I was studying this position. And I probably first became known for my running back stuff. And then I got better at wide receiver and quarterback as the years went on. But for a while, I would be known for making these calls and go like, Isaiah Crowell was the best running back in that class, but he got kicked out of Georgia and he's at Alabama State. And, and he ended up doing well. But, and I've had a number of hits like that. Well, Brooks is first of all, most people view, especially in the spread offensive era, I want pass catchers who have great speed. If they've got that great juice to where they're in open space, they're going to run away from cornerbacks and defense, and safeties. Yeah. And so people value that a lot. but they value speed too much, because then you get Anthony McFarland types who can't find the hole, don't know how to manage between the tackles, and on top of that, maybe they take a little longer to accelerate than their top speed offers. Say DeAndre Swift's another example of that, where you got to really give them a runway and a lot of open space for them to be really effective. So unless you land in an Eagles offense where Jalen Hurts is going to occupy 2 to 3 defenders on zone reads, and now you have a much lighter box than it looks and a straight line into the secondary, suddenly you're not that great. And obviously they didn't keep him after they traded for him, because they discovered that too. And the Bears don't look like they want to keep him either, though they might settle for him for another year. So when you look at a guy like Brooks, short area acceleration and short area change of direction to me are more important for zone runners and overall good runners than just speed. Speed's great for gap players. It's one hole. You don't have to manipulate anything. The offense is doing all the work for you behind the line of scrimmage. Your work comes once you hit that hole and hit it hard. And now you got to run through people or run around them, and you've got space in the secondary. But zone runners, you don't have to be super fast. You got to be super smart and instinctive and quick about managing things pre-snap and early post-snap to know, how do I influence defenders into blockers, and I have 2 to 3 choices on every run before I even hit the line to determine where I'm going to go. And so that requires a lot better footwork, a lot more quickness, being patient and pressing with them. You can probably feel the pulse of the guy, of the offensive line in front of you, because you're touching his thigh, probably, or his backside. You can probably feel the muscle quiver, probably, how close you are tight to somebody when you're trying to set things up. And that's what Brooks is really good at. And what also he's really great at that other players often aren't, that Frank Gore was and Le'Veon Bell was, is they can mitigate losses. And it's very important in the NFL. When you looked at Frank Gore, and a lot of fans at the end of his career, like, get Kenyon Drake on the field, get Marlon Mack on the field. These guys are so much better than Frank Gore. Why are you guys doing that? And the Miami coach is like, because we know what we're going to get from Frank. And then and you would watch the two backs play and run the same play, and you'd see, oh, it's a 3-yard loss for Marlon Mack. And all the fans are going, well, he's going to break a 30-yarder. He's going to do it. And then it takes him like 10 plays to break a 30-yarder, but the net gain out of those 10 plays was probably like 12 yards, or 17 yards. Where with Frank Gore, he may run the same amount of plays, and he gained 40 yards or 45 yards, and there were plays where he literally had to mitigate what was going to be a 5-yard loss, and he gained 15 on the play. And so it's craft, and Brooks has that quickness, the ability to press. He can run gap, and he can run through you, like Le'Veon Bell, who I liked early on. He had that quickness and speed, but he also had that size. He played at 230 until second year with the Steelers. Brooks played around 225, 230 at Texas Tech, and lost weight so that he could get that nice little 4.52 in the 40 probably, but he's always been quick. It showed up, and he and Bell have very similar styles in that regard, to mitigate losses, to press tight to the crease. And now Brooks kind of gets ruffled when he hears Le'Veon Bell, because I think he's seen all the off-field stuff with Bell and and he doesn't want to be compared professionally with some of the things that Bell maybe has gone through. But he likes to say Josh Jacobs. Jacobs, Frank Gore, six of one, half dozen of another. They run similar. They're smart runners, who can run zone and gap and also catch the ball out of the backfield. And Brooks can do all of that. So I look at him, and I know he's probably not going to be anything more than a 6-7 round pick, maybe even undrafted free agent in this class. But if there's a player that I would expect that's going to make a depth chart, either with his first team or his second team, and then the team that has him on their depth chart gives him some opportunities, and they're like, we got to keep getting this guy on the field.
That feels like a player. That feels like a player Carolina could have on their radar because they don't have to invest, or allocate a high draft capital for that. They just drafted Jonathan Brooks in the second last year, so they may have a little bit of like buyer skepticism of investing highly again in the position. But you got to operate on multiple timelines if you're a front office and you're building this roster out. And you say, look, you signed Rico Dowdle to the 1-year contract to kind of be that placeholder and see where Jonathan is.
And Rico's that kind of player himself.
He's that kind of player, right?
He couldn't stay healthy. He was
Yeah.
very good at South Carolina in spurts when he could stay healthy. So hopefully the Asheville native can make good in Carolina.
And this was his first season in Dallas. That was his first season of really being healthy for a full year.
But they kept him every year.
Yep.
What does that tell you?
They saw what he was able to do.
And I comped Dowdle to an aspiring Le'Veon Bell type of player.
Look at that.
That years ago. So it's fascinating that came up because the quickness, the agility, good pass catcher, and I think Carolina's a better offensive line than the Cowboys. So it'll be funny to see if I would love to see Rico Dowdle have the success, and people suddenly go, oh, he looks a lot better than I thought. I remember seeing him in Dallas.
It should help him to stay healthy when he's not having to be the bell cow here in Carolina, and you can kind of have him and Chuba. A lot of people were surprised because they're such similar players that they're like, why didn't you get this home run or this, scat back type of guy, this quick shifty guy? Canales doesn't care about that. Canales wants to keep on pounding you with the same thing over and over, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. Did Dallas spend more on Miles Sanders than Carolina spent on Rico Dowdle?
I believe they did. I think.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Enjoy that, America's team.
Yeah, look, we just got rid of Miles Sanders for a reason. So if y'all want to take Miles Sanders because he had a great Week 18 game against Atlanta and their third string defense, knock yourselves out, right?
Miles Sanders is the perfect example of a guy whose ball security was an issue coming out and who also could only run gap plays and was not a strong zone player, but had all the ability in the world to succeed Saquon Barkley or succeed LaShawn McCoy, but didn't have the conceptual skills and technical skills to really fulfill that destiny.
Yep.
And so, Carolina got something out of him. But I think they upgraded their backup running back.
Agreed, 100%. Edgar, welcome back.
Thank you. Man. I was going to say, I just looked it up. Rico is getting maybe $1 million more than Miles Sanders for next year.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
The cap. Yeah,
that makes sense.
And then there's all those incentives and everything. So
yeah,
but that's cool because I would have laughed. I would have laughed if Jerry Jones
paid Miles more.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry Jones must think that their staff is going to do a whole lot better job developing because they've got Jonathan Mingo in there as well. So they might just be saying, "Hey, Carolina must be a very inept franchise because they've got all this talent, and we'll just take them here in Dallas and we'll figure it out." So good luck. I can't wait to see how that plays out for them.
Yeah. Good luck to them.
Yeah. All right, Matt, let's pivot to one last position, if we can.
Sure.
Tight end position. And I want to start this by a guy that came in for a 30 visit recently that was reported for Carolina that I thought what you said about him was one of the most interesting things I've seen in RSP for a little while. And it's because you compared this player, a tight end, to a running back. And you might know who I'm talking about here. Now, it wasn't like a player comp. You're not giving like a play style, right? Terrence Ferguson, you talked about as being Tevin Coleman in a way. I'm going to let you expand on that so that you can kind of give the context necessary to that comparison and why you bring up the two players together. But Terrence Ferguson is a guy that Carolina just brought in, and you're not as high on him as a lot of other people. A lot of people have him in the top 3, top 4 of their tight end rankings. You have him at tight end 16. So speak a little bit about Terrence Ferguson and how your brain connected him to Tevin Coleman.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about him. It's the first time I've been asked about him in about 15 pods that I've done in the past 10 days.
Hell yeah.
So I love getting to talk about players that I haven't talked about. And the same was true with no one's asked me about Jalen Noel. No one's, so I've only been asked once about RJ Harvey. So those are fun. Ferguson. Okay. So listen, he's going to seduce people with those highlights and the performance metrics, that 4.63 40, that 39-inch vertical. And you know who also was like really seduced people that way with that height and that ability was Mike Gesicki. And Mike Gesicki, when you watch Mike Gesicki, he's an okay player. And you put him out on the boundary the way that Joe Burrow is going to use him, and that's great. But he's not he wasn't Travis Kelsey incarnate.
Yeah.
Okay.
He could be useful.
He's useful, but he's not, you're not first round useful. You're like, man, that's a really good third, fourth round pick. Like that's what you'd expect from a third round player. Or you go, that's a bargain at the fifth round. But a first round guy, yeah, no thanks. Okay. So the problem with Gesicki and Ferguson is that they are both stiff. Okay. They aren't mobile athletes from the waist down. So they can't decelerate as well. They are very good at being mobile from the waist up and adjusting to balls that are near them. So they've got a wide enough catch radius. But when you're talking about running man-to-man routes, no, you're not going to get that from him. You're not going to get that deceleration and that snap and turn and be able to really go at full speed and beat a guy off the line as a detached receiver. You may not even do it very well against linebackers, much less safeties. You also don't get a lot of that stop-start quickness that some top tight ends have. So when you're looking at a guy who's like a man-to-man, matchup receiver, he's not that, other than red zone, back shoulders, up the seam, where you can get help with play action and set it up so that he's got a mismatch. But he's not as mismatch dictated as he's not as good at dictating mismatches as other players can be. There's only a certain window of mismatches that he gives you. So what happens is that he's a very linear player. You need him to build up speed. You need him to have a long runway to do the devastating work that it looks like that he can do. So, people are going to get really excited when they throw, in early weeks of the season, when they throw a tight end screen and the defense is not really scouting for that and they were expecting something else. And now he's got a convoy and he gets 50 yards and people are like, oh my God, this guy's going to be a star. and then the next thing you know, now teams are playing him one-on-one and you never hear from him again. It's right. So Tevin Coleman is a linear athlete. He's not the quick twitch guy. He's the guy that you got to give a runway, let him build up the top speed, and he can get the top speed early, but he's not it's curvy linear movement more than cutting. He bends around people. He can't stop, start, cut. So when you're working underneath as a receiver and trying to make the first man miss, that's not Terrence Ferguson, but that's what tight ends do, or top tight end. Yeah. So you can throw him to a spot. You can get some big plays out of him, but he's kind of a boom bust big play threat, or a situational high leverage, use his size to win the ball. But even there, he has some issues with certain types of attack styles with catching the ball that he gets away with in the college game, where in the pros, it might be a little bit more difficult, but I think he'll still make big plays. But for me, he's that guy you draft after the fourth round and say, we can fit something in here and we can get big plays from him occasionally, but he's not our every down guy unless we have a lot of other cool options and we occasionally need a tight end in the mix.
So you could carve out a specific role for him, and if you use him with that targeted role, then you can get what you wanted to get out of him. But if you're drafting him to be your volume receiving tight end, even able to align in line, outside in the slot, maybe even outside wide, that's not what you should be looking for out of Terrence Ferguson.
Right. Like, look at Michael Mayer and how overrated he was. Now people go, oh, well, he's underrated. Somebody should be trading for him.
That's the thing now. Yeah.
That's what a lot of people say. But he's a great zone player who can win the ball in the zone against tight contact. And he can give you some man coverage skills when it's in a compressed area like the red zone. But he's not a great runner after the catch. He's not an unbelievable blocker, and he's not a great route runner against man. So you're not a matchup threat. Matchup threats Matchup threats are the players that you can keep on the field in every situation, and it makes your offense unpredictable. Jamar Chase is a matchup threat. Whatever you want him to do, he can do at a high level at wide receiver. And and when people know it's coming to him, they can't stop him.
Yep.
But then you would look at somebody else and say, Gabriel Davis is a scheme threat. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, but he drops the ball a lot. He's not a great route runner. And if you put the focus of the offense on creating one opening for him, one opportunity for him, he can make that work. But it's not you're never going to put him in the same universe as Jamar Chase. Terrence Ferguson is the scheme player to Brock Bowers' matchup player.
Makes perfect sense. That's a great way of phrasing that.
Is there any matchup threats that obviously there's the top, quote unquote, top 2 tight ends in this class, but maybe later down the line.
Not for Matt. The top 2 is not the same, just to throw that in there.
But that's all right.
I see who your tight end 2 is, but I guess my general question is is there matchup threats that are available, say day 2, early day 3, or are they going to be condensed more closer to the first round?
I think there are guys who can be more matchup threats. Like they're not high end matchup threats, but they're think Mark Andrews. He's a very good tight end, and he can be a matchup threat. But it's not going to be Rob Gronkowski level where you're facing a shutdown corner and winning. But he's going to be able to match up well against safeties and linebackers that he faces man on man. Mason Taylor for me in LSU is one of those guys. Really smooth. He can be physical. He's a good enough blocker to be your more of your standard F type of tight end. Your hybrid type of guy who can play outside, inside. So I like him. I'm a Harold Fannin Jr. fan. Just as everyone was high on him, I hadn't watched him yet. Yep. And then when he ran his combine numbers, they got low on him. And then I watched his tape and was high on him. Because 4.71 is actually faster than what Rob Gronkowski ran. Now he's a much bigger, stronger player, but they're running the same type of routes outside. Okay. And when you look at the quickness, the acceleration, the 20 shuttle and the 3-cone, it's comparable to Sam Laporta.
Yep.
It's very comparable. And they're about the same size. And they had about the same role. So really it just comes down to, are your GM and your coach aligned on what you want your player to be at tight end? Because it's a wide range. If the coach is saying, I need a blocker and I need a guy who just gives me Tyler Kraft, in the flat off play action and then run through people type of thing. Maybe you want Tyler Warren and then you can also get a little bit of contested catch stuff in the short zones where, and you get him matched up that way and you get a little bonus from that. But then you're still going to need to get him to block better because he's a nice blocker for the college game, but he hugs people. He's hugging everybody.
And people swear by him being this tremendous blocker and that being part of the value of why he's worth the top 10 pick, right? It's crazy to me, Matt.
I'm gonna. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Lance Zierlein. Okay, and Lance Zierlein, dad was an offensive line coach for the Steelers when they won a Super Bowl in the past, and for the Arizona Cardinals. And Lance knows his stuff when it comes to offensive line play. So I'm a little puzzled when I see him characterize him as the blocker that he is. So I'm not downing Lance more than I would say I would love to pick Lance's ear to see what is that he saw that I didn't see. Because what I saw was a guy who gets in the way, who doesn't know how to use his hands and doesn't always get the position he needs. And I think that I'm worried about him cleaning that up right away. Might take a little more time. But all the other skills he has still makes him a guy you can plug in and use situationally as a pass receiver right now and as a backside blocker, but not a top blocker. So, but I would say Fannin, you're not using him that way.
Yep.
He's going to be a Laporta type. And I think that that's what makes him, or a Delaney Walker type. And you think of late career Delaney Walker and how good he was in certain fits. I think Fannin can give you that. So those are guys in that range that I say right away, I feel good about. If this kid could like add a little bit more weight and he cut out the lows with his receiving game, Clemson's Jake Briningstool has some of the best high-end film shots of
Yeah.
catches that you'll see. But I compare him to Jatavian Sanders,
Mhm.
in terms of like the more immediate comparison. You already got a guy
Right.
like that. So, if you're looking for more of an all-around player and you don't have faith in Jatavian, which I would just take a second tight end just in case Jatavian doesn't work out.
Right.
But I'd give Jatavian the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
So, guys like Fannin could be nice. Gunnar Helm is a good pass catcher who was his backup.
What about can I ask about two players,
Yeah.
Matt, that I like and that I think could offer again, like what you're talking about is exactly what I think they should be looking for. As in Harold Fannin has a very specific thing that he can win at, right? Like he's a really good pass catcher. He's a pretty good route runner. And when you talk about the routes they're running, you brought this up in the RSP that I thought was imperative to kind of understanding why these 40 times of 4.71 shouldn't scare you off. How many times are you going to ask these guys to run a 40-yard go route, right? Like,
Right.
how many times is that route going to be what makes the difference of them finding success in the NFL? I love that both you and Dwayne McFarland were high on Sam Laporta, and that you both were sitting here saying, "Hey, look, Harold Fannin, he's got it," right? Like this makes sense.
Yeah.
Jalen Conyers, who you had an Algie Crumpler comp, which by the way, I just love that. Anyways, Algernon Crumpler was one of my, and I'm a Panthers fan, so I hate saying this, but I loved watching Algie Crumpler's
Man,
game.
he'd run through some faces there.
He
that
would
dude.
run through you,
Yes.
wouldn't he?
Yeah.
And the other guy that I kind of have in a very similar vein in a way of Harold Fannin is Oronde Gadsden. Where not the same player necessarily, but what you're going to want from them and what you would ask them to do and how I think they could fit with Carolina specifically. Oronde Gadsden kind of gives you that, I don't want to say joker component, right? But he gives you a mismatch. He's a pretty dang good route runner for a 6'5", almost 240-pound. I guess we'll call him a tight end. He's willing to block. I don't think he really excels as a blocker, but he seems like he has some effort with it, right?
Yeah. I'm higher on Conyers than I am
Mhm.
Gadsden. Conyers, I think, has a little more upside too. I think if he can refine his footwork, he's a very good contested catch receiver. And I think he could be a little bit more of a situational contributor because there's more upside for him as a blocker. Whereas I think Oronde Gadsden has a long way to go, even though it's not that far away in terms of ranking. The difference in score is literally 5 points on my board. That's like 2 or 3 things that you really got to get better at. And I see him more of like a guy who is a big slot receiver, but he's not a good route runner for a big slot receiver.
For a slot receiver, yeah.
And his athletic, his athletic ability isn't that compelling to me. And while he catches the ball well, there are even some minor lapses there. I have a different track for Carolina if I were going to suggest one. That you've got Sanders. He can catch. He can run after the catch. He's a decent blocker. Instead of trying to get someone at a low cost who is similar to him, get someone who's a complement to him. And if they build on their skills and show more as a receiver, then you've really got someone who's better than Sanders. But if you don't, you still get a guy with strengths that complement Sanders. So a good example of that to me would be a player like Jackson Hawes out of Georgia Tech.
Okay. Yeah.
Jackson Hawes is my tight end 20. He's
Mhm.
barely got a score that makes him a starter. The only reason that is because I use the RSP to place more value on the types of tight ends you're talking about. The receiver first, because those are the guys that get drafted early.
Fantasy and stuff
And
too.
it's for fantasy.
Right.
And it's the Bill Belichick kind of theory that you draft the receivers early, you can get the blockers any old place.
Right.
But Hawes is the best blocker in this class. He is unbelievably good. And if he shows more as a receiver, which I think there's potential that could happen, you might get yourself Tucker Kraft. as a player. And now you're looking at a guy who's more than good enough in the receiving game, who can give you some after the catch, who's a great blocker. And then if Sanders doesn't work out, he's at least functional in the receiving game and an asset in the run game. And then if you decide down the line that you really want to take a shot at an early round guy, you got value. More guys like that in this class, but not as good of a blocker, but maybe better receiver. I would say someone like Kaliki Latu out of Washington, who has maybe that CJ Fedorowicz kind of vibe to him, where he's a little bit more of a blocker, and a shallow zone receiver. Or you look at Maliki Matavao, who's a shallow zone receiver with some intermediate range upside, who I think plays to his size as a blocker, but as a ball carrier, he's kind of puzzling. You think he's
is that the UCLA tight end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's not bad. I would say another one that no one really talks about, but I'm kind of higher on him than most, that gives you kind of a Cade Otton, Zach Ertz kind of vibe to him, is Gavin Bartholomew out of Pitt. Like, he's a good route runner. He's an underrated blocker, maybe not great, but he knows how to punch. When I see a guy punch well and get position, he's good. He clap attacks some targets. If he can rein that in, he'd be a better weekly asset. But I think that he's one of those guys that could surprise as an undrafted free agent.
Wasn't he kind of an ascending prospect 2 years ago and then just had a really down season or had injuries or something? Like, I feel like I heard more about Gavin Bartholomew in like 2 cycles ago than I have since.
Honestly, I wouldn't know, because I'm that guy
You're
that
staying
didn't know
out of that.
Lamar Jackson won the Heisman until 6 months later and started watching him. The other name on that list, as you can see with the underline and the starter caliber tier, is Thomas Fidone. Thomas Fidone is the most interesting prospect in this tight end class, because he lost weight heading into the combine. Now, this is a guy who had an ACL tear, who was a top prospect, and then you look at him and did he lose the weight so that he could play lighter and be more of a receiver and get that early draft capital? Or does he lose the weight because it's better on his knees? But he can block. He looks like he played more like 250, 255. He's a good blocker, in line or outside as a move tight end. He's a good route runner. He has more quickness than you would think, and he definitely showed up well. 4.2620, 7.013 cone drill, and he ran a 4.740, which is still decent. 35 and a half inch vertical, catches the ball very well. Like, to me, he's one of those guys that if he's more the 250, 255, 260 guy, he's more like Pat Fryermuth. Can he be a Pat Fryermuth type of player? Which, not speedy, but if you use him more,
though, man.
he's very useful. He's like the modern day Heath Miller. Like, you're going to want that dude on your team, and he can make those tight coverage plays on 3rd and 6, and you're going to be happy you have him. If he's version B, maybe he's more Zach Ertz, Hunter Henry like, maybe faster and quicker than Henry, but closer to Ertz, where you can get in a spread offense. He's going to riddle you up the seam and can give you 700 to 800 yards worth of receiving value in a season. So to me, he's one of those guys that you look at and go, that's a bargain. And I don't have to, and I can use him how my coach wants him to be used.
I think that it is a good idea too, when you bring up these things about proclivity as a blocker. Important for a team that is a run-oriented identity like the Carolina Panthers to be able to deploy 12 personnel and not have just guys that are running routes and able to catch a football up the seam, but have guys that can really put their strength and their blocking prowess in display and keep them on the field so that you can run different concepts out of the same personnel groups, right?
That's right. The toughest part about the tight end position, is my co-host Adam Harstead on our show Film and Theory, that we do during the season, is that when he's looked at all the tight ends in history, he's a great historian of the game, really brilliant writer at Football Guys. Adam talks about how tight ends are unicorns. really like the way the position is meant to be. You're supposed to be able to run routes like a wide receiver, threaten the field like a receiver, run like a running back, and then block like a 6 offensive lineman. You know who's done that maybe in the modern era? In the Rob Gronkowski. And even he didn't have a perfect health record, but he did it the longest. George Kittle sometimes looks like that and certainly could belong in that conversation, but his health has been an issue too. It's hard on the body to do that diverse of a thing. They're just not. You can eat all the Georgia Clay you want. There's just not that many mutants out there who can do it. I mean, Brock Bowers tried to get him a few servings of that while he was in Athens, and he just got he's just a good receiver who can do a little fullback, H-back kind of stuff for you, but he's not full-fledged kind of that way. So that's the problem with this is that you still have to pick your spots no matter what with the players that you get, and if they're more receiver than blocker, that's fine. You just hope that there's enough blocker in there to leverage it for the good of your offense.
100%. Man, this has been so much fun, Matt.
It's been great.
I don't know if you anticipated us asking about as many first-time conversation pieces today, but that was a pleasant surprise for us that, we wanted to talk about guys that have connections to Carolina. It's a little bit concerning maybe that no one else has connections to these guys and wants to talk.
No, but to be honest, but for it shouldn't be, because the players you asked are really good. And also a lot of the shows I'm on have been Giants and Bills episodes lately.
Right.
I've probably done 4 of the 12 I've done have been Giants and Bills. And I still think I have another Giants one left. Or they've been fantasy oriented shows where everybody wants to know about the guys who are simpler to discuss, the marquee names that are simpler to discuss. And you hit on some of those marquee names for sure, and that fit. But Carolina's in a different situation than some of these teams. So that's, you guys are on their way up. Some of these teams are struggling to get oriented as they're falling to the bottom, or the Bills, who are already where they are, but they're like, I did a running back show on one, and they're asking me about receivers who fit Josh Allen's system, and I joke that Josh Allen's like the Ricky Bobby of the NFL in the sense that like, and that Dalton Kincaid is like, the magic man who like
Cal Naughton.
Cal Naughton. Can't you let me win once in the red zone here? Just can you throw me a downfield ball? Can you give me give me a back shoulder play? Like, free me up, dude. It's like, no, that's not how this arrangement is, That's not how it is there.
I never knew that I would meet somebody that has so much better analogies than I do when discussing football, because that's kind of my jam, man. I try to figure out weird ways to make things digestible for people. And Matt, you just one after another, man, hit on each one of those things. So I just want to say I appreciate that element of your analysis very much.
I'm glad it makes it entertaining. And I'd say one of my gifts has always been able to look at disparate things and find things analogous. And I think that's why I was a lit major probably in college. So, and poetry and all that stuff. So
I'm glad you decided to add your personality as much into the RSP as you have, man. I know that you have mentioned that multiple times in your publications, but the more that you put yourself into it, man, at least for me, the more I enjoy it very much. I enjoy you as a person, enjoy you as an analyst. And I just really appreciate you giving us the time, man.
It's a pleasure. My editors often like that too. They joke about that. So I appreciate it and allowing me to stretch out like this and for us to be able to talk about a variety of stuff. I mean, you put the work into a 1,253 word or 3-page publication, and then you have a post-draft comment. You put a lot of work into these guys. You want to share what you're excited about if you're that passionate to do something. So you guys giving me a forum like this on a regular basis is a gift in itself. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, like Ricky said, like you're inspiration to us. I mean, we're starting this kind of from scratch, and we could see like what a role model and just a model publication looks like. And so just as someone who's looked at your work for many years and gets to meet you for the first time, just want to say that, in person, I appreciate everything that you do. And sometimes it feels like you do a lot of work and maybe people don't appreciate it. Like people that don't say stuff also appreciate your work. So thank you for all you do.
Hey, Edgar, I appreciate it very much. You guys made my week, and I look forward to seeing what you guys put out there, and also getting a chance to connect again and talk more Carolina football.
Oh yeah, man.
Thank you. And if someone has to listen to Ricky's analogies, yours are a breath of fresh air.
I
A
know
dust
it.
of fresh, a
I
dust of
know it.
fresh air.
Goodness, and they're not, they're much more pointed, man. They connect a lot quicker, man. I'm a scenic talker, man. I'll take you on a whole long route,
Oh, hey, no. Listen, my wife's been with me for 20 years. She, somebody said the other day, they like my voice, and I laugh and I go, yeah, but somebody goes, I can hear you talk about this all day. And I'd say, yeah. I said, well, my wife's been with me for 20 years. So I think the time limit's about 16.
That's right.
So, and we both can weave a story. So we're both funny in that regard, because she's very detail oriented, and she tells good. She's a better writer than I am, if you ask me. Like she's a terrific writer, but she's not in that sphere. And one day she'll write a book, but like she tells a good story. And I laughed though, because there's times when we got the business of the relationship to attend to, and we're both going, okay, look, I got a minute and a half. You got to give me the minute and a half version. And we're both doing that with each other, So it's too funny in this household. And then I laugh because I got this dog, and I can tell when he's getting bored listening to us talking.
Yeah.
He starts looking out the window like he is right now. Let's see if I can get a picture of him looking out the window. He's like, now he's looking at me. But he had his chin literally on the windowsill, like, when is this going to be over?
He's sitting there looking at you. He's like, look, man, you got that elevator pitch section in the RSP. Can't you just give the elevator pitch to these guys? Like, I'm ready to go out there.
He's pretty much. He's literally like, it's funny when I go practice my bass or something at night, when he listens to, I play with saxophone and the bass, and he's okay with the saxophone, which is pretty funny. But when I'm done, I'm like, he finishes, when I put it up, he wags his tail. He's all excited that I'm done. And when I play the bass, I'm learning how to play the bass. He starts, he gets antsy, and it's too late at night when I'm playing. He starts chewing on my chair. Like, dude, time to cut this short.
Yeah, look, we'll go ahead and we'll let our viewers and listeners now start to wag their tail, because we'll wrap this up and we'll let everyone get to what they would like to do. Matt Waldman, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not, go to www.mattwaldman.com, purchase the 2025 Rookie Scouting Portfolio, read it, take the time, digest it, and then look forward to the post-draft version. For my co-host, Edgar Salmingo Jr., and myself, thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you on Draft Crush.